We've learned about advanced arrays. We've also learned about sets and what you can do with sets. And in this section, we're really going to dive into maps. We're going to talk about what the difference is between the sets and the maps. We're also going to be talking about weak maps, similar to what we talked about with weak sets as well. Maps add some additional functionality on top of sets. It is a very similar way to be able to store the data, but to be able to access the data and how you store the data is different. So let's go ahead and dive in and start talking about what maps are to begin with. Before we dive in and start using maps, let's go ahead and just talk about maps in general so we understand what maps are and some of the differences with maps compared to sets. So maps use a key value pair and it keeps the original insertion order. That's important to know. We're going to be talking about that here in a second. But it keeps it in order. And any value like objects or primitive values can actually be used as either the key or the value. With maps, you have to define a key and you have to define a value. Just like with sets, when we added a value to a set, we had to pass in the value of that set. But instead with map, we actually have to pass in the key and the value. And there's some important things to notate here. Notice that instead of add, we're using set. So we're setting the value and we're setting the value of the key and we're setting the value of that key as well. It's really important to know because when we want to reference this map as well, and we want to grab the key, we need to know what that key is to be able to identify it. So really maps are a storage location just like sets are, but we're storing different types of values in this key value pair. We can have strings as part of the key, we can have numbers as part of the key, we can even have functions as part of the key as well. And we can have objects as part of the key as well. It just depends on what you want to use and how you want the maps to function. An important thing to notate, because you can do something similar with keys and values with arrays, but the problem with arrays is if you try to iterate in order, there's no guarantee that it will actually go in the order that you've inserted it. If you've inserted and you want it to go through that specific order, you can't guarantee that. It'll jump around sometimes. Sometimes it will get in that order, sometimes it may not. There's just no guarantee. But with maps, there is a guarantee and it will go in that insertion order. It'll go one by one and go through all of your different values that you've entered in. Let's talk about the different properties and methods that come with maps. Some of them are very similar to sets, but other ones are different. So size is the same as the set, so we have access to the size, but that's pretty much it. We can get the size of the maps, but we don't have access to a lot of other properties there. But for as far as methods go, we have clear, so we can clear out the map completely. We have delete, so we can delete specific items of the map as well. We have entries, so we can get into the entries of the map. We have for each to be able to iterate through them. We have get, so we can actually get the value. We also have set, so we can set the value as well. We can check to see if a map has a certain value. We can also access the keys. If we want to just get all the keys for all the entries, we can go in and just access the keys, and we can access the values. That's the property that we're going to be working with throughout the section and the different methods that we're going to be working with throughout the section. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on the different methods available when you're working with maps. Now let's talk about creating a map and then adding and removing values from that map as well. I'm going to come into this project and make sure you download the project files. Save the project files that you had from the set section and make sure that you have that so you can go back in and reference. But I'm going to download the project files for this section and I've modified the code a little bit so you can just start off from where I'm starting off. I'm going to go ahead and copy this starter project and then I'm going to paste it on my desktop. Let's go ahead and preview this first of all. So I'm going to double click on that folder and then double click on index.html. So nothing's really set up to work on this yet. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Sublime and I'm going to open up the index.html. It's pretty much the same here. There are a couple differences with find value and find cell, and there is also the add cell function as well. If I open up page.js, I have my add cell, I have my find cell, and then I went ahead and commented out the charts again because we're not ready to use those yet. Now I need to come in here and right below the yearly total, we're going to go ahead and create our new map. So I'm going to say const, and then we're going to say monthly sales, and then in that I'm going to go ahead and say equals, and this is very similar to creating a set, but instead of a set, we're going to go ahead and create a map. So open close parentheses, that is now our monthly sales. Now in our new cell, as soon as we click on add cell, which happens as soon as the modal pops up, we enter in our information, we hit add new cell. In our add cell, we're going to go ahead and say monthly sales, and then we're going to dot set. Remember, we're using set instead of add. Now I'm going to give this a title. I'm going to give it a key. How am I going to identify this later on? I want to go ahead and just do it as a string first of all. So I'm going to go ahead and say new cell. The new cell is going to go in and grab that value from our new amount. We're still referencing that new amount right there. It's going to grab that dot value. And that's how we're going to go ahead and alert that value. So let's go ahead and just console.log this. I'm going to go ahead and go to monthly sales and then just hit save. I'm going to go ahead and preview this now. Coming back into my project, I'm going to hit refresh, go into add cell, go ahead and enter in October. Let's enter in the amount and then hit add cell. Well, let's go into our inspect element here and let's go into our console.log. Let's go into our console and you can see we have the key being new cell and the value being 1200. So it automatically separates out for me, and that way I can go in and I can grab all the keys, I can grab all the values. Well, it's a nice little handy function there. Let's go back in here, and instead of new cell here as a string, let's actually enter this in as a number. I'm going to hit save here, go back in here and hit refresh, and then let's add our new set, and then let's add our value here and click on add cell. Right click here, and then you can see that it has that 1 as the key and then 1200 as the cell. Let's say that I wanted to find a cell and I wanted to actually go in, and after I've entered in the cell, I wanted to find that specific cell. So you can do that by actually using the get method. What I'm going to do here is console.log, and I'm going to say monthly sales and then .get. And what you do inside of open close parentheses there is you basically type in the key. In this case, we're using the key as 1, and that will actually go in and get that value. Let's go back in here and hit refresh. Then let's hit add cell, go into this and add in October for the month and then 1200 for the amounts. Now, if I right click on this and go into inspect element and go over to here, it will add that. I'm going in and I'm actually logging that out when I add the cell. But let's go in and use that find cell function. Go back into the window here, and then you can see that it is logging out that 1200. It's going in and finding the key, and once it finds the key, it's logging the value there. That's a way that I can go in and I can get the value. Let's say I wanted to go in and delete that. So let's use this fill cells to actually delete. I'm going to go into my index.html, come up here to find where it says fill cells right there. And you can see I have this fill value. I'm going to go ahead and leave that function the same here. Come back into page.js and let's create a function, open close parentheses, open close curly bracket there. And we're going to say monthly sales dot delete, and we're going to go ahead and pass in the key. So that's how I go in and identify which one that I actually want to delete. Oh, make sure that I actually console.log that as well, just so I can see the value. We'll console.log monthly sales, and now let's hit refresh. Okay, let's go ahead and enter in October, 1200 for the amounts. Click on add cell. Right click and go into inspect window, go into our console, and there we go. It is inside of there. But now let's go ahead and hit fill cells, which will actually, let's right click on that inspect window or inspect element. Come in here and you can see that it has no value. So we've gone in and we added it, but we've also deleted it, and we're logging it just to make sure that it's been deleted. Okay, so that's how you can go in and you can delete it and just make sure that it has been deleted. Let's actually get rid of find cell right there, and let's just check to see if it has the number 1 as well. So we can also do a function that says, let's go ahead and console.log, and let's log to see if this monthly sales has the value of 1, the key of 1. Monthly sales dot has, and then pass in the value of 1. That's the key that we're looking for. Let's go ahead and hit refresh, and let's add in a value. So we'll go ahead and start with October, 1200, and then let's add the cell. Click on find cell, and we should get that console.log that it's been true. And yes, we have that here. That key does exist. So I can quickly go in and check to see if there is a certain key inside of there. Now I want to modify this a little bit differently because we're just setting a key there, but I actually want to modify it to set the key to be whatever the month is. All I have to do is actually come into new month right here, come down to where I have this key right there, go ahead and paste in new month and then just type in value. Whatever somebody enters in as the value of that month, that's what we're going to be checking, which means we're no longer checking for one here. So we can go ahead and just get rid of those for now. It's basically going to set that, and it's going to set the key as the month and then the amount as the value. When I was working with sets, I was working with two different sets, but in this case, I can work with one set and be able to store the key, the month as the key, and then the value as the amount that the person entered it in. I'm going to go ahead and hit save and then preview, and let's enter in October here, and then let's hit 1200 and click on add cell, and then right click and go into inspect element there. And then let's go ahead and expand this out. And you can see the key is now set to October and the value is now set to 1200. Now, if I was to add in another one here and then go ahead and hit add cell, right click and go into inspect element, go into here. Now you can see that we have 2 here. Let's actually console.log the size. So I can actually get the property of the size. Then I can log that size. So I can say October 1200. Go ahead and hit add cell, and then let's say this one is now November, and this is going to be 1400. Hit add cell, right click and go into inspect elements, and then you can see that it now has alerted 1 and it has alerted 2 because that's the size. The first time we ran it, it only had a size of 1. The second time we ran it, it had a size of 2. That is a property that we can use to see how many different entries there are. But that's how you go in and how you add and how you remove, and some of the other basic methods that you can do with maps. In the next video, we're going to be talking about iterating through a map and grabbing in the values and being able to work with that map data to be able to update our graphs. Now we're going to be talking about iterating through the map and how we actually go in and grab the keys, and how we go in and grab the different values, and what we can do with those. And it's very similar to working with sets. There are the 2 different ways to be able to iterate. We have the for each and we have the for of as well. Now I'm going to come in here and under add cell, what we're going to do is we're actually going to update the labels first of all. So let's go ahead and uncomment out the bar chart here. And you can see that we have this monthly sales chart. We have our labels, which is a blank array. We have our data, which is a blank array as well. Let's add our labels. We're going to update our labels. Okay, now I can easily do this by a similar method to what I was doing before. So I can say monthly sales chart dot data dot labels, and then we're going to say equals, and we're going to use the array from, just like we learned about in the first section here. And we're going to say array from, and then now we're actually going to just say array from not just monthly sales, but we want to grab just the keys. We can come in here and say monthly sales dot keys. Open it and close parentheses, and then there we go. Let's update that chart. So I'm going to come in here and say monthly sales charts dot update. We're going to call the method for chart.js to be able to update the graph. And let's just do that for now. Let's go ahead and go in and preview our project. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and I have that as soon as I update it. So I'm going to click on add. I'm going to go in and say October and then say 1200. And then hit add cell. So you can see it automatically updates that. So let's go ahead and add one more here. So I'm going to say November, and then we'll say 1400 here, and then click on add cell. Well, it automatically does that for me. So I don't necessarily need to go in and iterate through the keys just to grab the keys. I can just quickly do that by converting over the keys. It's just a lot more simple than what I had to do before. All right, what we need to do now though is we actually need to go push in that data. We're going to use, for example, we're going to use a simple for each just to log out to see if this is what you wanted to do. So we're going to say monthly sales, and then we're going to go dot for each, open close parentheses, and then inside of those parentheses, we're going to go ahead and do a function, and then we're going to pass in the parameter of cell. That is going to be the data that we're going to work with, and then we're going to say console dot log, and then we're going to log cell. Okay, so let's go ahead and preview this now. Come down here, click on add cell. We're going to go say October 1200, and then go ahead and click on add cell. Let's go into our inspect elements, and you can see that it logs 1200. So I can get right into that cell for each of the monthly cells. We're basically going to go in and grab that value. However, you might remember a problem that we had with the set. is that data that we are working with is actually a string. When it comes in as the new amount, it is a string. So we actually need to go in and parse the integer of that so we actually get the number instead of the string. Now, if I hit refresh, visually it won't look much different here. If I enter in the amount of 1200 and then go into add cell and then inspect element, oh, looks like we got a problem. We have our parse integer. Looks like I misspelled parse. Yep, I needed an E there, so let's try this again. It's 1200. Click on add cell here. And now if I inspect elements, there we go. This is blue, so it does let me know that it is a number and not a string by that text color. If I wanted to loop through and grab all those values, I can do that. But another way that I can do that is by using the for of. So let's actually get rid of that. And I'm going to go in and just grab the value. So I'm going to say for, and then I'm going to inside of here say let amount of monthly sales dot values. We just want to go in and grab the values. We're still parsing the integer, so that's great. And we just want to grab the values, make sure that that is plural there, and then open and close curly brackets there. And also make sure that I actually close this with the parentheses there as well. I don't need a parenthesis at the end of that. It actually needs to be right here. It's going to go through each of those, and then it's going to allow me to go in and update the amounts to the yearly total. So we have our yearly total up here. I'm going to say yearly total is equal to amount plus yearly total. So we're going to take the new amount and add it to whatever the current amount is. And then we're going to update that label. So we'll say yearly label dot inner HTML equals, and then we're going to say yearly total. That is going to be the new number. If I go ahead and hit save and hit refresh here, and then click on add cell, you can see as soon as I add that cell, it's now updated that label. Let's go ahead and add another cell. So November and then 1100, and click add cell. It updates that automatically. It does the math for me. Now what we're going to do for each of that data amounts, for the amount here, what I'm going to do is push that amount similar to what we did inside of our sets. If I just copy this code in here, what we're doing is we're saying a monthly sales chart data sets for each of them. So we're doing a for each inside of here. We're going to take the data set and we're going to push in the amount right here. It's going to do that automatically for us, and then it's going to update the chart. Now, if I come in here and hit refresh and click on add cell, it's going to update the label, but it's also going to update the amount here. Now, we'll have a problem, a similar problem to what we had before. If I come in here and say, this is now 1500, notice that the first one actually gets set to 1200, and then a third one, which doesn't have a label, gets set to 1500. I just can't see it. That's because I need to clear out the data. I need to clear out a yearly total as well. And then I need to clear out the data for this before I start adding new amounts. And I don't need to do it in the for loop there. I can actually come in here and say yearly total is equal to 0, just to set that back to 0 there. And now I can actually come in here and copy the same code that we worked with inside of our sets. And this is just basically setting the chart.js data back to a blank array. For each of those, we're going to set the data back to that blank array. Now, if I come in here and hit refresh and then click on add cell, go into this and start adding in our value here. It's going to add in that first value, but let's go ahead and add in the second value as well. We'll do 1500 here and then click on add cell, and you can see it automatically updates for us. In the next video, we're going to be talking about what the difference is, because some questions might have popped up. It's like, why don't I just use objects for this type of thing? We're going to talk about what the difference between objects and maps are and why you'd want to use maps over objects. So a question may have come up throughout this. If you're familiar with objects, you're familiar with arrays, why are we not just using objects? Why would I actually want to go in and use maps? So there are a couple big differences, and in this video, I wanted to explore what those differences are. The first one is being able to iterate so much faster through a map than you can through an object. As far as structure, you can go in and create a map, and you can have a key and a value for that map. For the object, you can go in and still do a key and a value for that object as well. But there is a difference in the key value. The key in the object, the keys must be simple data types. That means you can only have integers, you can only have strings, or you can only have symbols, and really nothing more than that. For maps, you can have any data type. You can have those primitives, you can have objects as well as a key. You can have the object, you can have arrays, you can have functions, you can pass in a spread operator for the array. Really, that is some of the differences is if you're wanting to work with more than those simple data types as a key. Another one is element order. So keep in mind that objects and arrays, you essentially can't guarantee the insertion order. It could be jumping all over the place. But with maps, you guarantee the insertion order. So if you wanted to go into first cell until the latest cell, you can go through the map and iterate through that and make sure that you have that insertion order there. Another one is inheritance. A map is inherited from an object. That means that as a map, I can actually go in and get the methods and different properties of an object, but an object is not a child of a map. So you can't actually inherit some of those methods inside of an object. And so you don't get some of the methods that make it a little bit easier to work with, like just being able to use has or being able to use set and get as far as setting the data of the map. So just things like that, that you don't get that when you're working with a map, but you do get the methods from an object when you're working with a map as well. Now, some of the other functional differences that I wanted to run through is, for example, creating. There are several different ways to be able to create an object. You can see that you can create a blank object, you can create a new object as well. But for maps, there is just one way to be able to create a map. So it simplifies the whole process and makes it more consistent. There's a couple different ways to be able to get the object data, but for a map, there's only really one way. You use the get method. For checking, you can do a bunch of different things to see if something exists and if it's equal to an object. But for checking inside of a map, it really comes down to that has. Does this have a certain object? And if it does, it'll result in true. If it doesn't, it'll result in false. And so it just kind of simplifies the checking a little bit more. For adding, you can add to an object in a couple different ways. But for adding in a map, it really simplifies it down to set. You basically set and you pass in the key and the value. For size, you have to basically say object keys object.length in order to get the object size. But for map, you just use a simple map.size in order to get the object size. And that's some of the main differences that you want to keep in mind when you're using maps over something like objects. You get access to these additional methods that you don't have with an object. It simplifies some of the code as well. It is faster to use. And so that's really some of the main differences why you'd want to use a map over an object. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and dive into what some of the differences between a map are and a weak map, and then we'll go into actually using the weak map and explore how to go in and create a weak map. Now let's dive into some of the differences between a map and a weak map, just so we're on the same page as far as when you would want to use a map and when you would want to use a weak map. And a lot of it is very similar to when you would want to use a set and when you would want to use a weak set. Keys must be objects in this case. You cannot have a key value as a primitive value, so you have to have it as an object. Now, the objects similar to sets are actually held weakly, and so if it's there, it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. And they're not iterable, just like sets. You cannot iterate through a weak map, and they're also garbage collected. And so if it's not necessary for that to be stored inside of data, it'll automatically free it up. So weak maps are also not enumerable. Enumerable means that they cannot be fully counted. So even though I created a map, if it's not being referenced, I can't count on that in that certain number. In maps, you can use keys and values and clear and entry and for each and get and set and has. But for weak maps, you really can only use delete, get, and set and has. And that's really it. You're basically down to those different methods to be able to get, to set, to delete, and to check to see if a value is there. So let's actually go ahead and set up our weak map and work with some of the different methods that a weak map has. Now that we have a general idea of what a weak map is, let's just go in and explore the weak map here. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable here, and I'm actually going to place this inside of a block of code. And I'm going to go ahead and say let cells A, and we're going to create an object here, and because the key inside of a weak map needs to be an object. So let's just go ahead and create the object, and I'm going to say the object is going to have two different values, and that's going to be 1, 2. Now what I'm going to do is actually create a map, and we'll just start out with a map here just to explore the differences. But I'm going to say this is going to be a new map, open close parentheses, and then end that with a semicolon. And now I'm going to say map.set, and we're going to pass in the value of cells A. That is going to be our key. And now we're going to pass in the value of hiking. Now inside of here, because it's inside of curly brackets, I should not be able to actually console.log the map. However, because maps are not garbage collected in general, you can actually go in and you can console.log this. And so I can say console.log, and then I'm going to go ahead and console.log map. Now let's go ahead and preview this. I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh, and then I'm going to right click and go into inspect element. Now as soon as I do that, you'll notice that the map actually gets alerted here. I have my object and I have my hiking, but again, I should not be able to do that because it's inside of here. One way to make sure that that does not happen and that it's garbage collected is I can come in here and change this to week map. Instead of using map, I can go ahead and say week map, and then it will be garbage collected and I should not be able to access it. I'm going to log this, first of all, inside of the brackets. I'm going to say console.log, and then inside of there, I'm going to say first, and then add plus, and let's make sure we have a space, so we have a space in between the word, and we're going to say console.log, and then we're going to say second, and then I'm going to say plus, and then cells A as well. You can see here the console.log, the first one should give me that information, but the second one will no longer actually work. So if I come in here and hit refresh, you'll notice that it's not loading fully because I'm getting an error. If I go into inspect window, and you can see that this error is essentially saying that I cannot find cells A because it's inside of these brackets. I don't have access to it. And if I go ahead and comment this out, let's go back in here and hit refresh. And now if I inspect the elements again, now I will have access to that. So it is garbage collecting, so it's not available outside of that scope. So it's just a way to be able to work with your data more securely and make sure that it's not available outside of a certain scope as well. So that's one way that you'd want to use a weak map. Let's wrap up by talking about what we've learned about in this section. And first of all, we were introduced to maps. And so we talked about what maps are, how you can actually add and remove values from maps, how you can iterate through maps, and also the differences between maps and objects, and the reason why you'd want to use maps and some of the additional methods that you get when using maps. And then also the difference between maps and weak maps, what maps are and what weak maps are, and some of the benefits that you get with weak map. That's really what we've covered. This section was designed just to cover maps and talk about some of the benefits to maps. In the next section, we're actually going to go back to arrays, but we're going to go back to a specific type of array, and that is called typed arrays. And we're going to talk about why you would want to use typed arrays, what typed arrays are used for, and actually start exploring typed arrays in the next section.